Considered by many as one of the very best around the world, today's dessert is a category unto itself. Not only does it stand out among all Arabian sweets, but also among all international desserts. Knafeh is a sensational treat, and I'm going to be sharing with you everything you need to know about it in this masterclass, so don't go anywhere. Knafeh is a pastry layer topping a cheesy or a creamy filling, then soaked in a sugar syrup that infuses it with sweetness. Even though it seems structurally basic, but the ratios of its ingredients as well as its baking method make it a multivariate craft. This is a dessert that offers a heart-melting contrast of texture and flavor, but can only be achieved by getting each of the elements correctly. There are multiple variations of Knafeh in Turkey, Egypt and the Levant. The one commonly known in Egypt is the one filled with the sweetened clotted cream, and the cheesy one is more common in the Levant. In today's video, we're going to prepare two types of Levantine Knafeh. The first is Palestinian and the second is Lebanese. Now, let's check the components of Knafeh. The first and most emblematic component is the topping pastry. The most common is the one of thin threads known as Knafeh pastry in Turkey, shredded phyllo in Greece, or rough Knafeh pastry in Arabia. This pastry is like very thin spaghetti, so thin as its diameter can be below 1 millimeter. I tried preparing it at home for about a year and I could never reach that level of thinness. I even tried a pasta machine to shred phyllo pastry, but the result was a bit too thick and sticky. In the past, they used to make it by releasing a stream of wheat, water and starch mix on a heated large disc. The consistency of the mix, as well as the speed and distance from which it's poured, determines how thin the stream is. Believe it or not, I got the same old device custom made for me in Cairo, but I still couldn't create such thin threads. Nowadays, the same concept is mechanized by trickling down the liquid on a heated turntable. Luckily, you can buy the end product in several delis and some supermarket chains. The second type of pastry topping, which is mainly traditional in the Levant, is known as the fine Knafeh topping, and is made from ghee, wheat flour, semolina and milk, which are dried and then ground into little grains to be baked on the top of the Knafeh dish later. Now we're going to prepare it together. For preparing the fine pastry topping for the Knafeh, we're going to need 333 grams of wheat flour, 41 grams of starch, 75 grams of ghee, 60 grams of semolina, and half a teaspoon of baking powder, as well as 333 grams of milk. After getting our ingredients ready, we're going to mix them all together and create a dough ball out of it. After making sure that it's all homogeneous and soft, we're going to leave it to rest for about 15 minutes while we preheat our oven to the highest degree possible. Once our oven has reached the hottest temperature possible, we're going to turn it off and then flatten the dough ball into a 1.5 centimeter thickness. And then put it in the oven to dry out completely. You can leave it there for an hour or more until the oven is completely cool. Once we open the oven and check the dough with our hands that is completely dry, doesn't have any wet spots, we're going to take it out to cool down once more just to make sure that it's completely dry. After our dried dough has completely cooled down, we're going to break it into chunks to put it later into a blender or a food processor to turn it into little small grains. A small part will be left aside to be ground into a very fine powder, because that will be sprinkled first on the pan to give the surface of the Knafeh a very uniform and a soft appearance. Now we have reached the second defining element of Knafeh, which is the filling. The filling can be either a sweet cream, or cheese, or a mixture of both. In today's video, we're going to be making two variations of toppings and two variations of fillings. The two variations of fillings will be one with cheese and cream, and the second one will be only cheese. The sweet cream is a type of clotted cream that we prepare by mixing starch with either high fat content milk or whipping cream until it's reduced to thickness. As for cheese, there's a multiple variation of cheeses used for making knafeh, but the most traditional and authentic ones are the Nabulsi cheese from the city of Nablus in Palestine, and the other type is the Akkawi cheese from the city of Acre in northern Palestine as well. There's a widespread commercial misunderstanding that both types of Akkawi and Nabulsi cheese are actually the same thing, with only a regional naming difference. But the truth is that the Nabulsi cheese is made from goat milk and the Akkawi cheese is made from cow milk. Also, the Akkawi cheese is not subjected to heat in its production process and it's way more stretchy than the Nabulsi cheese, while the Nabulsi cheese is more stiff but way more flavorful and tangy. Since there is a few number of ingredients in the knafeh, that means that they're all equally essential. The next one is no exception, the ghee or the clarified butter. And for that I'm going to use a traditional type that I always prefer to use with the knafeh, which is the gold medal brand. Even though I can prepare it at home, but I prefer to use this brand specifically with knafeh. Ghee is made by reducing butter to its essence by removing all the water and the milk solid particles from the fat. The function of the ghee in the knafeh is to insulate the topping pastry, which makes it get baked nicely and slowly without getting burned, and it also gives it a great flavor. The ideal amount of ghee for preparing knafeh is around 45 to 50% of the weight of the pastry topping. If we use more than that, we're going to end up with soggy and very strong tasting knafeh, and if we use less than that, we might get it too dry and maybe burned in the process. The fourth element of knafeh is the sweetener syrup, and this one couldn't be easier. We mix 250 grams of sugar with 150 milliliters of water and add a tablespoon of lemon juice on them. We put them on the stove to boil and then let them simmer down for about 12 minutes. The function of the lemon juice is to prevent the surface of the sugary syrup from glazing so it remains runny. Now we reach the part of assembling our dishes. As I mentioned earlier, we're making 2 variations of fillings and 2 variations of topping pastry. So we're ending up with 4 different dishes of each filling with a different type of topping. Before we go ahead with putting our dishes together, let's go through the basic ratios of any type of knafeh. For each 10 cm of pan diameter, we will need 80 grams of pastry. The filling should be 1.5 up to 2 times more than the weight of the pastry. The ghee used to cover the pastry should be around 45 to 50% of its weight. The first dishes we're going to be preparing are the ones with the Palestinian filling. The Palestinian filling is made of 70% of Nabulsi cheese and 30% of Akkawi cheese. For our 2 pans of 13 centimeters of diameter, we will use 200 grams of pastry and 300 grams of cheese. So about 200 grams of Nabulsi cheese and 100 grams of Akkawi. We use the Nabulsi cheese for its distinctive tangy flavor and the Akkawi cheese for its texture and stretchiness. These types of cheese are really salty, so we should soak them in water for 2 hours and change the water every half an hour. We can also grate the cheese and change the water twice to get rid of the salt. The first step of assembling our dishes or pans is to rub our pastry topping dough with liquid ghee. This has to be done thoroughly, but more importantly, with the pasta Thready type of topping because it does not include ghee in its composition. Remember, the ghee's function is to insulate the pastry dough and let it cook slowly until it reaches a perfect crunchiness and a very good color. The second step is to wipe the bottom of the pan or the dish with a piece of soft ghee and not liquid ghee. This is to prevent the pastry dough from sticking to the pan during the baking process. If you use liquid ghee instead, that would be absorbed too quickly by the pastry dough, which would cause it to burn or get too crunchy in the end. After that, we're going to place the pastry in the pan and press it very well against the bottom. We do that to ensure that the entire surface will be cooked equally without any discolored patches or unbaked spots. By this time, if you haven't grated the cheese already, make sure you grate it and get rid of all the water from it. Try to dry it as much as possible because any remains of water will make the pastry dough a little bit mushy and tasteless. After that, we're going to start covering the top of the dough with cheese and make sure that we avoid placing the cheese too close to the edge of the pan, as it would expand and end up contacting the pan and get burned. Now we're gonna start preparing the Lebanese style Knafeh. In this one, the filling will be a mixture of sweet clotted cream and a mixture of cheese. The mixture of cheese will be a mixture of Akkawi cheese and cream cheese. The ratio of the mixture of cheeses and the sweet clotted cream is 2:1, and also the ratio between the Akkawi cheese and the cream cheese is 2:1. Since we're going to be using the same type of two dishes of 13 centimeters of diameter, we're going to be needing a filling of 300 grams. Out of the 300 grams of filling, we're going to have 200 grams of the cheese mixture and 100 grams of the sweet clotted cream. And out of the 200 grams of the cheese mixture, we're going to have 70 grams of cream cheese and 130 grams of Akkawi cheese. Now let's prepare the sweet clotted cream. We're going to bring a pot, put it on the stove, and pour 150 grams of whipping cream in it. In a separate container, we're going to add a little bit of milk, preferably high-fat content milk, and add 2 tablespoons of starch to it and make sure we dissolve them completely. You have to be very quick with this process so they don't create lumps in it. After the whipping cream on the stove gets a little bit warmer, you can add the milk and starch mix to it and make sure you keep stirring continuously so the mix doesn't get stuck to the bottom of the pot and get burned. While the mix is still in the liquid state, add the amount of 1.3 tablespoons of sugar to it and make sure you stir it properly. Optionally, you can grind 7 pieces of mastic, which you can sprinkle on the mix once it gets a little bit thicker. Once the mixture has reached the desired thickness and consistency, you can add the mixture of the cream cheese and the Akkawi cheese to it and stir them until they become all homogeneous. Now we can start baking our 4 dishes, but keep in mind that the Thready thin spaghetti type is better baked in the oven, while the fine grainy one is better to be done on the stove. For that purpose, we're going to preheat our oven with the conventional setup. We're going to continue baking it on the stove on low to medium heat for 15 more minutes. We're going to also put the other types of Knafeh with the fine grain topping on the oven for the same 15 minutes, as they don't need more time than that to get baked. So now we have all 4 dishes on the top of the stove on low to medium heat for 15 minutes to get finally baked and ready. During the 15 minutes of baking on the stove, you have to keep close attention to the pastry dough by the border of the pan. That part by the edge of the pan that is uncovered by the filling will be the indicator of the completeness of the baking process. Once you see it getting browner and nicely baked, that means that our Knafeh is ready and you're going to be able to flip it on a dish and serve it. Once you do that, you can pour some sweetener syrup on it and also add ground pistachio on it to make it look great and also taste better. Your entire conception of confectionery will entirely transform after trying this very dessert. Please give it a try and let me know how it went with you in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video and see you very soon.